this whistle is for a clock issue. Clark still upset after that hit.
This is what Caitlin Clark is upset about. The screen set by Griner. Yeah, in a little bit movement with that right shoulder and the body. But
there are a number of different analytical threads that run through the Connecticut Sun game, each of which deserves a detailed analysis rather than being condensed into a broad post-game summary. Therefore, we need to have a very serious, direct, and completely honest conversation about a number of things that happened in the game. Sophie Cunningham's return and what it implies about the nature of her absence, Aaliyah Boston's interior execution issues, and the larger pattern of what Clark can continue to produce despite the organizational and camp edit of environment surrounding her are all examples of the officiating failures surrounding Caitlin Clark's statistical dominance over the last 5 games. It all fits into the full accounting of what this game disclosed. Huck Park was furious about her, partly because of the scream bike ride, but he didn't have a right shoulder. And I'll start with the officiating because a particular play in the fourth quarter exemplifies the kind of competitive inequity that can't be politely accepted and then ignored without considering its true implications. In the fourth quarter of this game, Brittney Griner gave Caitlin Clark what onlookers regarded as an outright collision. By the standard applied to contact situations elsewhere in this game and throughout this season, it should have resulted in a foul call and possibly called for more forceful officiating intervention. This was not incidental contact or competitive defensive positioning that resulted in accidental contact or physical interaction. There was no call. Let's put it simply. In the fourth quarter, Brittney Griner, one of the biggest and most physically imposing players in this league's history, smashed Clark with a hard move. The officials did not raise the alarm. The play went on without any repercussions for the Connecticut player or defense for the Indiana player who was hit. This is not an isolated grievance from a fan base that stands up for its player in every competitive hardship. The statistical information makes it impossible to rule out this particular, documented occurrence within a season-long trend of officiating inconsistencies involving Clark. For a player who has been playing at an exceptional individual level during this stretch of the season and who attacks the basket with the aggression and contact-seeking directness that elite offensive players use to generate trips, Clark did not shoot a single free throw in this game. Instead of being accepted passively, the free throw line 0 free throw attempts statistic calls for an analytical explanation. The analytical community has been monitoring the larger officiating pattern during the Clark season with more documentation and growing displeasure. When Clark is the player absorbing the contact situations that would result in whistles for other players in similar circumstances pass without calls. Similarly, moving screen violations that ought to be called when Clark is obstructed by defenders who are not legally established in their defensive position are permitted to go uncorrected. These officiating choices have a significant overall impact. Every facet of Clark's statistics output and her capacity to provide the goods that her Office of Capacities ought to produce are impacted by this significant competitive disadvantage. The 5-game statistical window that this game falls under is one of the most analytically meaningful production periods this season has produced, so let's put Clark's performance in this game in the perspective of her recent run. Clark finished with 103 points, 37 assists, 27 rebounds, 14 three-pointers, and a 4-1 win-loss record for Indiana in his 5 most recent games before to this Connecticut Sun encounter. These figures do not represent a player who is having trouble in a challenging organizational environment. A hermit. The argument that this Indiana Fever team performs better without Caitlin Clark, which observers have noticed circulating in some corners of the discourse, is completely and unequivocally demolished by this 5-game statistical stretch. 103 points, 37 assists, 27 rebounds, and 4 wins in 5 games. Their MVP-caliber production delivered consistently across a sustained stretch that includes games where the coaching decisions, the officiating, and the systemic constraints have all been working against maximizing what she generates. Clark is the difference because the evidence against Connecticut is unambiguous. In particular, Clark created another individual performance that, given the systemic constraints in which it was produced, belonged in the masterclass category. The motion of offense was once again the organizational framework, meaning that possessions were routed or through other players and around Clark in ways that limited her direct creative involvement in the office of design. Nevertheless, Clark generated the individual production that made Indiana competitive and ultimately triumphant in this game despite that system, the fact that there were no free throw attempts, and the fact that Griner's physical contact in the fourth quarter went uncalled. This season's recurring and analytically accurate narrative revolves around Clark's exceptional individual output within a system not intended to maximize her abilities against an officiating environment that does not consistently apply the same protective stand or to her that it applies elsewhere, while still leading this team to competitive results that the coaching decisions surrounding her would not have produced without her individual excellence. Aaliyah Boston's performance in this game necessitates honest accounting because Boston's inability to consistently make layups and close-range conversion failures were significant enough to impact the competitive picture in ways that the final margin obscures. A persistent execution issue that extends beyond sporadic competitive areas is Miss Bunny's missed finish opportunities at the rim, which Clark's playmaking created and provided. It occurs when an open inside look is created by Clark's facilitation and the interior player who receives the pass is unable to convert it. The possession value that Clark created is wasted, and the assist is not recorded. This season's trend indicates that Clark's real influence on offensive possessions is far greater than what her official assist totals show because those only possessions where the pass receiver goes straight to a made basket are recorded in official totals. Boston's pressure circumstances and layup conversion rate have been known to be problematic, and this game against Connecticut contributed to that record. The necessary fix is uncool and has a convoluted basketball logic. Professional players at all levels are expected to convert close-range looks that the off and creates for them. However, Boston's tendency to miss those looks, especially in fourth quarters and under pressure when the offensive system has successfully created the interior opportunity, is something that the coaching staff needs to address through individual accountability and practice repetition. After returning from her injury, Sophie Cunningham scored 11 points, played 18 minutes, and made 4 of 5 shots from the field, including 3 of 4 from three-point range. This is an effective performance from a player who had been listed as questionable due to an elbow injury that caused organizational controversy in the context of N's diagram situation and the timing of the designation. Her performance in this game was sincere and real. She returned, made a meaningful contribution, and this summer, Sophie Cunningham's claim that her elbow did not seem to be a limiting physical element in her performance has created its own discussion in the analytical community. Circumstances. Concludes. If Warner Brothers and On a Cruise grassroots know where their roles were reversed, another reports that supposition is my area of our horizontal. Go into the go-through with Ronald Reagan's Though Horseman So Works. The Morrow movie with sugar or more work is definitely, I'm not sure if you're referring to Welcome to Talk About Girls. If we're to cruise from fans on female bottles or anything else, then that's definitely correct, in my opinion. I faxed the region, and that's all we have when Gentleman Resources may look for true news. The full documented context of the situation makes it impossible to rely solely on its medical merits without taking into account the organizational timeline surrounding the designation appearance. The overall statistical picture of this game adds up to a competitive result that Indiana deserved and that Clark was primarily responsible for producing the motion that remained in play, regardless of whether that observation speaks to the nature of the injury, the speed of her recovery, or simply the competitive toughness that professional athletes demonstrate when they return from physical issues. Space is the organizational system that revolves around passing, concluding, and possessions that often appear for other players instead of the player who is responsible for the team's competitive success. The player making the largest offensive effect and making the most physical contact received 0 free throw attempts from the referees. The plus-minus data shows that this team is measurably and significantly better when Clark is on the float than when she is not. The evidence is cumulative and overwhelming, and the analytical conclusion it supports is undeniable. The officiating aspect of Clark's situation deserves the institutional attention it has not received because the pattern is now documented across enough games to constitute a season-long standard rather than a collection of isolated incidents. The interior player received Clark's playmaking and missed layups that those plays should have converted. Griner made a physical play in the fourth quarter. When Griner can deliver a physical fourth-quarter play against Clark without a whistle, when Clark goes a full game without a free throw tries, when the moving screen violations that hinder her movement are allowed to stand without correction. Similar circumstances involving other players in this league are not subject to the same officiating standard that is being applied to Clark. This discrepancy is a competitive reality that impacts results, statistics, and the complete manifestation of what Clark's skill level ought to yield in each game in which he scores 103 points, 27 rebounds and 37 assists, 14 three-pointers in 5 games in this game, 4 victories and 1-0 free throws. The entire picture is the comprehensive account of what this game produced and what the surrounding circumstances reveal about where this team is and where the repetitive limitations continue to originate. Griner's fourth quarter play went uncalled, the motion was frequently deployed again, Boston missed layups, Cunningham returned and produced efficiently, and Clark delivered another masterpiece performance in a game where everything around her was designed to limit what she could generate. Close the gap. Thus, we can make a profit. For us, however, a clock on A, B, and 80 would spray a weak's eye. Therefore, if you're thinking that Sophie scored 11 points in the last 2 minutes, you're thinking that she got it. I wasn't sure about a third, but Susanna can make 3 with new elbows. I suppose that's when I last met. She claimed to be loyal to us. Simply said, we are incredibly proud of her. She puts forth a lot of effort and is someone I need as an usher. What can you tell him about this from another one like this? Just perseverance. We still need to figure out a lot of ways to improve and refine our first blow away, but I suppose we just want to make it thrilling for the fans and people at home. However, those are really difficult in this league because these clubs are incredibly skilled. How would you have performed better at events? What would you have wished to see? The team that is extremely athletic and gets second chances in their posts or gets in the pants far so good that they are definitely better. Marvel versus. As I mentioned earlier, we let them go out and transition a little bit there before. That's kind of like got the run going. But overall we'll take away, and that's all that matters. Another one that's like a lot bigger, Laura. Thank you, Caroline. The winds continue to blow, the production continues, and the systemic limitations, the offensive system, the officiating and consistency, and the execution shortcomings of the players in her immediate vicinity continue to create circumstances that call for Clark's individual excellence to overcome rather than circumstances that exacerbate what that